will remind you that there are 180 House members and there are 56 senators, all of which have the same rights and privileges to introduce any legislation he or she wishes. So if you see an article or you see a news story about a particular issue that you don't like, don't panic. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to run across the governor's desk in a year's time. So there's hundreds and hundreds of bills. In fact, there's probably over 1,000 bills that'll be introduced this session alone. I would bet less than 20% ever get to the floor for a vote. You agree? And a lot of times our bills will get bipartisan support. I would say 80% of the bills end up having 90% voter turnout on the floor. So we don't have a lot of bickering between Democrats and Republicans. There are always issues where we do differ. But for the most part, we get along well with our counterparts, and we do good between the House and the Senate. The Democrats and Republicans work well together. But there's a couple issues that we know we're going to disagree on, and we just agree to disagree. But there's one that we agree on wholeheartedly this year, and that is a commitment to the taxpayers of Georgia and to the businesses of Georgia to try to help fix the problems we have with transportation. Most of you drove here today. Anybody ride a bus or a transit system? Got one hand in the room, two hands in the room. The rest of y'all either rode a horse, walked, or drove your cars. I'm betting that you drove your cars down here. And I'm assuming most of you got on an interstate at some point in your travels this morning. We have a little congestion problem in Atlanta, if you haven't heard. And it didn't happen overnight. But we've got a shortage of revenue on how to fix that problem. And so for the last year, we've been looking at how do we go forward and how do we sustain our transportation needs and how do we get funding that's going to be sustainable to take us into the next 2 to 3 decades. This issue is not a one-year fix. It's not a short-term problem. It's a long-term problem. And it's primarily because of our own technologies. Technology is a great thing. We were up here a little while ago talking about my watch, how I can take phone calls off of it and I can get my emails and my texts. 10 years ago, you never thought of an idea like that unless you watched Batman or some comic strip. But things are changing fast. Your cars today are computers. They're already talking about how computer hackers can get into your cars and look at your systems. We can track your watch. We can track your phone. The government knows where you are. If the GBI wants to track you, they can get in touch with AT&T. They can find out pretty close where you are right now based on your cell phone. It's sending a signal back and forth to a cell tower. We can do the same thing in Oregon. They're testing a system on cars on how many miles you travel in a year in your vehicle. They know where you're going in and out of state, whether you're in a city or on a county road or a public road or a state road. These are things that are happening before our eyes. So we know that we've got issues and we've got to change our way of doing business. In the last, I guess since the automobile was created, we've been putting gasoline in our vehicles to make them move. And so our main source of funding for that has been the motor fuel tax. And so look at what your cars do today. Most of you that have a new car, you're getting 20 or 30 miles to the gallon. I still drive a Ford truck that gets 14 miles to the gallon, but I choose to drive that Ford truck because I like my truck. But a lot of you have a car that might get 30 to 40 miles to the gallon today. Under the new federal laws that's being mandated, all vehicles going forward are going to have to get higher fuel efficiencies. Well, that's good for us as consumers, but it's not good for the DOT because their primary source of funding is coming from that sale of that gasoline. So you're getting better fuel mileage. Everybody's driving smaller vehicles. And so those are things that we're all having to look at and say, how do we go forward? How do we continue to build new roads? How do we continue to maintain the roads we have? We're operating on $1 billion a year of state taxes coming from the sale of motor fuel. Another issue we have with motor fuel tax is the price of gasoline. Everybody in the room loves the fact that gas has come down to $2 a gallon, would you say? Well, who knows when it's going to go back up? It probably will. But about a year ago, it was almost $4 a gallon. So in a year's time, the price of gas has dropped in half. Well, so has the income for the DOT and for your local governments, because we're getting sales tax off of the sale of motor fuel. So at 7% of $3 or 7% of $4, we capture 20 to 30 cents a gallon. off of that sales tax. Well, that price has come down to $2 a gallon. What's the simple math? 7% of $2 is 14 cents. So we're losing a couple $100 million a year right there. And so that's money that's not going to the DOT. That's money that's not going to construction projects, which I think some of you may have an interest in. And it's not going to create jobs. It's not going to fix our roads. And so we've got to look at how do we continue to maintain our infrastructure in Georgia. So there's a lot of options out there. There's been a study done, as we talked about earlier. We went all over the state. We met with your cities and your counties in different parts of the state. Excuse me. We've talked to leaders, business leaders. The Georgia Chamber of Commerce has been heavily involved in this process. And we came up with 8 or 10 different options. You could do a vehicle miles traveled policy. You could do a straight gas tax. You could increase sales tax. Or you could do nothing. We have electric vehicles that are driving on the road today. Anybody in an electric car, raise your hand. Congratulations, you're not paying any gas tax at all. But everybody else is paying to fix the road so you can drive on. But I'm proud for you. Now there's a tax credit out there. If you didn't know this, I'm going to put a plug in for the auto dealers. If you want to go buy a brand new electric car today, you can get a $5,000 Georgia tax credit and you get a $7,500 federal tax credit. I'm not sure if this gentleman did that or not, but I know a lot of people that did. So we're encouraging people to buy electric cars because of zero emissions. But at the same time, those cars are going onto our state routes and our local roads, and they're not paying gas tax. So they're not paying to use the government services. So that's another issue we've got to look at. So we put all these ideas on the table, and we try to come up with a piece of legislation, and that's what we've done. A bill was dropped over in the House recently. Jay Roberts, the chairman of the transportation over there, he and I co-chaired this study committee all last summer and last fall. Well, he came up with a bill with the help of a lot of people in this room and around the state. And so we're doing the debate now. The process has begun. The committees have been hearing the bill, and it's come through one subcommittee already, and it passed. And is there opposition to it? Yes. What we're trying to do is we're trying to raise $1 billion a year minimum. We need probably $3 billion a year to really do what we need to do, but that's almost unachievable in today's political climate. So we're trying to come up with $1 billion to $1.5 billion a year of extra revenue going forward. It's not a 2-year or 3-year fix. This is a long-term fix. We have billions of dollars of projects that need to be funded. There's just no money there to fund them. So you're going to hear a lot about it. You've probably already heard it in the news. There's going to be changes made to the code section. One thing that we all feel certain is going to happen is we're going to get rid of the sales tax portion of gas, and we're going to convert it to a straight excise tax. Not to get too far into the weeds, let me give you just 3 components of gas tax. There's a federal component, which is 18.4 cents to the gallon. So every time you pump a gallon of gas, 18 cents goes to Washington. And then there's 7.5 cents per gallon of state excise tax, and then there's a 7% sales tax that goes into the gas as well. So we've got 3 buckets: federal excise tax, the state excise tax, and then the 7% sales tax. Out of the 7% sales tax, 4% of that is state sales tax. 3%, typically 3% all over Georgia, goes to your local governments. So the 3% is your E-lost, your lost, and your SPLOST, typically. Now, there's some exceptions to that, but that's a typical county in Georgia. Out of the 4% state sales tax, 3% goes to the DOT, and the other percent we refer to as the 4th penny. It goes over here to the general fund to pay for other things in the general budget. The Constitution says that all motor fuel tax derived from the sale of gasoline shall be spent on roads and bridges. So we take that literally, and we want to move that 4th penny back to the DOT where it belongs. That adds up to about $175 million a year for that 1%. So there's $175 million out of $1 billion. We're not quite there yet. So we're looking to convert that sales tax to an excise tax, put it all on transportation. We believe that sales tax that's collected off of the sale of motor fuel should be spent on transportation. Now, some counties and cities will tell you that they do that, and I agree they do, but we want to ensure that every dime of that money gets spent on transportation. That's about $575 million a year, depending on the sales price of gasoline. Again, it fluctuates up and down. So there's $500 or $600 million. The 4th penny is $175 million. We're not quite there yet. So we're looking at the excise tax over a 4-year average. What's the price been on the average price of gasoline? And that's where we'd like to set the excise tax. It's not a bump in a large amount up or down, but we're trying to just average it out over the last 4 years. If we set that excise rate at last year's $4 a gallon rate, it would get us to $1 billion pretty quick. But everybody in Georgia would say that's a tax increase and we don't want to pay more taxes. So we're trying to get through it politically, but we're also trying to run the state. So we're trying to get to $1.2 billion, or $1.5 billion would be preferable this year. Not sure where we're going to get yet, but we need your help. Every House member over there and every senator over there has to make a decision on this before the bill can pass. Some of them are undecided, some are no, some are yes, and the only way they're going to feel comfortable is if they hear from their people back home. So when you go over there today, we need you to talk to your representative, your senator. If you don't know who he or she is, there's people over there that'll help you find them. You can get them to come out of the chamber onto the floor and tell them who you are, tell them that that person is your senator or your House member, and you want to encourage them to help fix the funding needs for transportation. Funding for transportation means jobs, and it means economic development for all of us, and it means quality of life. I come from Dahlonega. A lot of times I'll drive down in the mornings. If I don't leave town by 5 or 5:30, I'm stuck in traffic for 2 hours. It's a 56, 58 mile drive. I should be able to do it in an hour and 10 minutes. If I leave at 12 o'clock in the middle of the day and go home, I can get home in an hour and 10 minutes. So it doubles my commute time depending on when I leave. That is going to continue to worsen. We've got several projects along the interstate routes. I can name a few of them. Interstate 75 and 575, we're building reversible lanes up there. Simply all that means is we're going to build 2 more lanes that you'll be able to use coming into town in the mornings, and then after lunch they'll shut down the traffic and the flow will reverse, and you'll go back out of Atlanta after lunch in an opposite direction. In order to use those 2 new lanes, you're going to have to pay a toll. It's being built by equity and private money, and some state money that are involved. But it's $1.2 billion project, and it's going to require some private funds, and so we're going to pay for that over the next 50 years with tolling. Georgia 400 and 285 is one of the busiest interchanges in the state and the southeast. There's currently projects going on there to create some new ramps and some new access off of 400 and 285. It's going to be in excess of $1 billion as well. One interchange project, $1 billion. That's a lot of money. Now, that's as much as the entire state collects a year off of motor fuel tax for the DOT. One project is going to wipe out that entire budget. Obviously, we can't pay for it in 1 year, so we have to stretch it out over multiple years through financing and some borrowing. We can't borrow our way out of this mess. We've got to fund it, and we've got to find the solution for it through motor excise tax and other sources. So you're going to see a lot of debate on it. You're going to see a lot of people shot at and poked at, and it'll end up in the primaries next year. So we need your help as a business community. We need you to be out there on the front lines with us and encourage your members, your elected officials to do the right thing. So I'm going to stop now and see if there's any questions that I can answer for you. I know you've got some other business on your agenda.